Good evening, everyone. My name is Paulette McIntosh, and I am the Program Director for Student Engagement and Leadership at Prince George's Community College. I would like to welcome you to our National Voter Education Week series of programs that are being offered this week. Today is Know Your Ballot, and I'm delighted to have a presenter with us this evening, Miss Nancy Soring, who was a past president of the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County for a number of years, from 2003 to 2007. She's also served as president of the League of Women Voters of Maryland from 2009 to 2013, and then again from 2015 to 2017. She currently serves on the board of directors of the League of Women Voters of the National Capital Area. She's also a member of the advocacy team for the League of Women Voters of Maryland and is currently secretary for Purple Line. Purple Line is a nonprofit that advocates for the Purple Line Light Rail projects. So please join me in welcoming, giving Ms. Nancy Soring a warm virtual PGCC welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Paulette. And nothing I like to do better than interact with people who want to learn about what's on their ballot and want to be informed voters, as you can see by my sign behind me. So we're going to start by letting you know that everything I'm going to say tonight and more can be found on the League of Women Voters of Prince George's County Voters Guide, which I believe that Paulette is going to share a link to that. But I think there's a couple different ways you can get it. You can also go to lwvmd.org, and on our front homepage is a list of all the voters guides throughout the state of Maryland. So maybe if you have a family or a relative or somebody who lives in another county, they can get access to the voters guide that way. In addition to these, which are sort of written in a text form, like a booklet, we also have an interactive site at vote411.org, and that has the same information plus pictures of the candidates if you care about that. And when you use that one, what you do is you click on two candidates that are running for the same office, and you can compare the answers to their questions side by side. So just a little introduction there. So who will you be voting for on your ballot for this election? Well, pretty much everybody is aware that there's going to be president and vice president at the top of the ballot. And then in addition, you'll be voting for your representative in Congress. And then it gets to the part that a lot of people aren't real aware of: judges of the circuit court, the judge of the Court of Special Appeals, and then your Prince George's County Board of Education. And then in addition to who you will be voting for, it's also what you will be voting for, and you will also be voting for statewide and Prince George's County ballot questions. So I'm going to do a kind of a quick overview of all of those. So you're probably familiar with the job of the president. I'm just going to briefly, for all these offices, talk about what they do. So the president's in charge of all the military forces, and he kind of functions like the chief executive officer of a company. The powers of the president are defined by the Constitution and in law. As well as that, the president appoints members of the cabinet who head many of the federal departments, and he appoints federal judges and judges to the Supreme Court. All of those judicial appointments, though, are subject to confirmation by the Senate. You probably heard a lot about that lately because it's been in the news a lot. And I gotta quit playing with my mouse when I do this. So you'll see that not only are the two major candidates that we've heard of, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, on the ballot, but there are several other candidates who will also appear on your ballot. And if you look at the Voters Guide or Vote 411, you will see answers from many of the candidates, although I have to say on the presidential race, the only candidate who we got a response from was Vice President Biden. The next office you'll see on your ballot is your representative from Congress. And Prince George's County has parts of two congressional districts, Congressional District 4 and Congressional District 5. And if you don't know what district you live in, you can go to mdelect.net. I think that was on an earlier slide and I forgot to bring that up. You put in your address and it will tell you what congressional district you live in, what school board district you live in, and if it happened to be a year when you were electing county council, it would tell you what district you live in for the county council. So you probably also know that the representatives in Congress, they make the laws along with the members of the Senate. And then in the House, they also conduct the investigations on various issues of importance. And laws that impose taxes always begin in the House of Representatives. So this year in District 4, you can see at the bottom are the two candidates that are running, George McDermott, the Republican, Anthony Brown, the Democrat, Chris Palumbo, the Republican, and Steny Hoyer, the Democrat. All of those, backing up a little bit, all of those members of Congress were asked questions about various important public policy questions, such as immigration, climate change, disparity in income, and how they would deal with that. So I would really advise you, if you're not sure who to vote for, to read their answers to your questions, to the questions. So the next office that you would be voting for is Judge of the Circuit Court for Circuit 7, which serves Prince George's County. This is where people really have not a lot of ideas about these people and how, you know, what their opinions are and how they would serve. And fortunately, I believe everybody that we sent a questionnaire to who is running for judge answered in our voter's guide. So what does a circuit court judge do? Well, the hearings in the circuit court require juries because they are about more serious crimes or more serious civil cases versus the district courts, which take up things more like traffic violations and minor disputes. Once you're going to the circuit court, you're going to have a jury. And the way it works in Maryland is that when a vacancy on the bench of the circuit court appears, the governor appoints a qualified person who has been recommended by a bipartisan judicial nominating commission. But then at the next election, after that judge's appointment, at least 1 year after their appointment, that judge has to stand for an election before the voter. And what's interesting and different in Maryland than a lot of places is at that time, any person who has passed the Maryland bar may run for the sitting judge's position. The other thing that's interesting about judicial elections is they are considered bipartisan, not nonpartisan. What that means is during the primary, all of the candidates are on the Democratic and Republican ballots. If you've ever voted in the primary, you know whatever, it's only for Democrats and Republican, and whatever party you're registered in, you will get a ballot. However, all the judges are listed without their party affiliation on the Democratic and the Republican ballots. Then the top vote getters move on to the general election. So you will be filling 5 vacancies, or not 5 vacancies, but you will be asked to elect people to 5 positions on the circuit court judge, and there are 7 candidates that are running. And those candidates were asked questions about their qualifications for the job, what challenges face the judicial system, how to reduce the number of repeat offenders, and how they would reduce the risk that bias will influence their judicial decisions. And as I said, all these responses are in the voter's guide. Then there will be another judicial confirmation on the voter's guide, because this is for the judge of the Court of Special Appeals. And this works a little bit differently than the circuit court judges, where it's actually a contest where people can run against them. In the Court of Special Appeals, what happens is the voters are either allowed to say, yes, I want to retain this person in the position, or no, I don't. So they're not running against anybody else. They're running against themselves and their own reputation. And these judges, though, were also asked the same question, although on this ballot, there's only one judge on there. And I guess for whatever reason, he declined not to answer the questions. And the way this works is that every 10 years, whoever's in that position has to come before the voters for a yay or nay until they turn 70 years of age, and then they may no longer run again. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, so there's just one person who's running for that. The next office that's on the ballot is the Board of Education, or you may know that of the school board members. So the role of the school board member is to share the responsibility of making and overseeing education policy with the chief executive officer. So it's kind of a joint responsibility for making policy and overseeing it to making sure that it's implemented. It takes a 2/3 vote of the Board of Education members to override a decision on school policy or fiscal management that's made by the chief executive officer. Their school board and the chief executive officer also draft the budget and work on that. The Prince George's League of Women Voters did an interesting thing this year. They asked students what questions they would like to be asked of the Board of Education. And one of the suggestion that came through loud and clear is that they wanted to know about the disparity of the delivery of services in the different school systems. Some of the other questions that were asked of Board of Education members were, how do you deal with ineffective teachers? How do you make sure that there's adequate facilities system-wide? The candidates were also asked, those were all things that the students were interested in, but the candidates were also asked how they, as members of the Board of Education, would raise the academic achievement level of Prince George's students, how they would engage students, parents, and the community, and what their priorities would be when adopting a budget. They were also asked how they would address the achievement gap between students of color and other students. And also, would they be willing to look at what other school districts have done and learn from some of those examples? So those were the questions that were asked of the candidates for Board of Education. And these are the different districts that are up for election this time. You can see District 1 is not a contested election, but there are 2 people running for the seat in District 4 and 2 people running in District 8. The others are not contested, but you still would be interesting to read how different people's views are on these different important policy issues related to education. So those are all the candidates that you'll be voting for. The next thing that you're going to be voting for are ballot questions. And the first 2 ballot questions I'm going to talk about will be on the ballot for every voter in the state of Maryland because they have to do with state issues. This is the language that you'll see on the ballot, which is some kind not really clear, which is why I love it when people invite us to come talk about this, because ballot questions can really impact how government operates, and how government operates can really impact your life. So this question has to do with the authority of the Maryland General Assembly in drafting a budget. As you know, budget is a spending plan for the state, and the priorities are often reflected in where governments choose to spend money or choose to not spend money. Right now in Maryland, our General Assembly has less authority than any legislative body in the country, because the way it works is that the governor drafts a budget with input from his different departments or her different departments. Although I don't think we've had a female governor yet, but the governor drafts the budget and then it is presented to the General Assembly. Their only option is to make cuts. They can't move things from one item to another. They can't add things. They can't create a new item. All they can do is cut the budget. And this would, in order to change that, we have to amend the Constitution. So question 1 is a constitutional amendment, which means that it passed the legislature by a 3/5 majority, and then it has to be passed by the people. So an interesting thing is that this constitutional amendment idea has come before the General Assembly for decades, but it never made it through.
Wow.
I think there's a couple features that are different this time. I think one of the main ones is that it will not go into effect until they draft the 2024 budget, at which case the current governor will not be in power. Always the governor, whether it was a Democrat or Republican, has opposed changing this system. But this time it won't happen until the sitting governor is no longer in power. The other thing I think that makes this different this time is that right now, even though the governor has all the power in establishing the original budget, once the legislature agrees on a budget, that's it. It goes into law with no further action by the governor. If question 1 passes, the legislature will be able to add to the budget or move things around, but the governor will have a line item veto. And something else I need to make clear, although they can add to certain items, the whole spending plan cannot be larger than what the governor proposed. So they're not going to spend more, but they might prioritize where the spending would go. In addition, another part of the Constitution that won't be changed is that in Maryland, we are required to have a balanced budget. So you cannot have a spending plan that does not reflect sufficient revenue to pay for that spending plan. Some of the arguments in favor of passing this constitutional amendment are that the Maryland legislature, as I mentioned, has less power in the budget process than any other legislature in the United States. And conversely, the governor has more power than any other governor in the United States. Other people also think that it's important that members of the public have an opportunity to influence funding for programs of importance to them. The way budgets are drafted right now, it's pretty much an inside job between the governor and the department head. And by the time the governor's drafted his budget, advocates have a really hard time getting that changed, because all the General Assembly can do is cut it. And as I mentioned before, this constitutional amendment would not change the current requirement that the General Assembly must pass a balanced budget. Some of the arguments against this is that because the governor would have the power to enact line item veto, there may be special sessions to override those vetoes. And it does cost a little bit of money to call a special session. And it could possibly take longer to pass a budget because there would be much more trading and compromising and talking and bargaining. But you might end up with a better budget, who knows? And then some people are concerned that legislators may be more likely to be worried about their constituents and what their own constituents want than having a statewide perspective. So that's a really important ballot measure, and I really hope people think about it. And the voter's guide does have some more information about this. So as I said, a vote for means the legislature will have more authority. A vote against means we'll keep doing things the way we're already doing. The next constitutional amendment is kind of interesting because it has to do with gambling. And Maryland has kind of a unique provision in their constitution that started way back when the legislature was interested in having slot machines gambling in the state because they were looking for a way to fund education. Back then, that was the Thornton bill. So, but increasing gambling in Maryland, although we did have the lottery at that time, was quite controversial. And the legislators were afraid to just voted up or down. And the governor wanted it, the legislature wasn't sure. So they said, I know what, let's have the people vote on it. So they amended the Constitution that says anytime you expand gambling in Maryland, the people get to weigh in on it. So the current form of gambling that's being proposed for raising revenue for Maryland is commercial gaming, which would authorize betting on sports and different events. If people voted for this referred law, the General Assembly would still have to pass legislation that defined what kind of sports betting would be legal or what kind of event betting. I was curious when I said event betting, what is that? And they said, oh, you could actually bet on who was going to win the Oscars, that kind of thing. But they would have to decide, could it only take place at a venue, like at a casino, or could people do it online? Could it happen? Could you bet on sports other than horse races at racetracks? So all of that would have to be worked out in a General Assembly session later if this goes through. Actually, in the last session, there was a bill that kind of described some of that, but they didn't have time to work out all the details of it. So they said, okay, we'll work out the details later. Let's just ask the public now if they want us to look into and implement sports wagering. So some of the arguments in favor are that allowing sports betting in Maryland would enable the state to compete with the 14 states that are already raising revenue this way. And some people say, well, illegal sports betting already takes place. We should provide a legal way for people to do that and tap into that market and also reduce criminal activity. And then depending on how it's implemented, Maryland could raise estimates, it's been estimated between $20 to $40 million a year that would be invested in education, which could yield long-term benefits for Maryland. And speaking of how it's implemented, like I said, they haven't decided yet what share of the revenue would go to the operators of the gambling venue and what share would go to the state. That is still to be determined. Some of the arguments against doing this is that Maryland does already have a lottery, we have slot machines, and we have casinos with various gambling table games, and that this would just add another way to raise money from people who may not be able to afford it and may become addicted to gambling. Also, some people say that if sports betting is implemented in a similar way to casino gambling, the vast majority of revenue would go to the gambling operators, and it really wouldn't help education that much. And then others are worried that if people start betting on sports, they're going to be paying more attention to what kind of money they're making and not appreciate the athletes and the athletic event. So if you vote yes for it, it means that the General Assembly can pass legislation to establish a program of sports wagering and event wagering. And if you vote against it, that means it will still remain illegal in Maryland to wager on events and sports. So the next batch of things that you'll see on your ballot, and the very last thing you'll see on your ballot, but it's all equally important. And this is why I'm happy I'm here, because some people just go in, they go, oh yeah, I know who I'm going to vote for president. I know who I'm going to vote for Congress, but then they get down to the bottom of the ballot and they go, geez. And plus the language can be confusing. So anyway, the last questions are 5 questions that pertain just to Prince George's County. Because in Prince George's County, if your county council wants to issue bonds so they can borrow funds for construction of public projects, they must first get approval from the voters. So all 5 of these questions have to do with issuing bonds, which means the county can borrow money for construction of projects. And this is where the language gets really wonky. But the bottom line is question A would allow Prince George's County officials to borrow $178 million to renovate and build roads, bridges, parking lots, and maintenance facilities. So, and then these bonds would be paid back over time. And then you either vote for the referred law or against the referred law. Question B is, very similar, only this is about allowing the county officials to borrow $28.8 million to pay for the construction and improvement of libraries in the county. Question C has to do with allowing them to borrow money to pay for the construction and improvement of public safety facilities, specifically the fire departments in the county. Question D is about borrowing money or issuing bonds to allow county officials to pay for the construction and renovation of county buildings. For example, well, just county buildings. There's a lot of buildings throughout the county. The last one should have particular interest to everybody on this call, and that would allow officials to borrow $121 million to pay for the construction and renovation of community college facilities. So if community colleges is something that you're interested in, be sure to go to the last question on your ballot and either vote for or against it, depending on how you feel. And that's basically what's on your ballot. And I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has any.
Are there any questions?
Screen sharing. No questions?
Nancy, I think that you did a very good job, a thorough job. It was in explaining what's on the ballot, and in particular the ballot questions. And the League of Women Voters, I always look forward to their voters guide because
good.
it's very informative. And so I will definitely encourage all of our viewers that they make sure that they go out and that they access the link. Again, to get that site, it's lwv md.org to go on that site in order to access the voters guide. And then also another resource is to go to www.vote411.org in order to get more information about the different candidates who are running for the different position. At least those who are able, who answer the questions, they're invited to provide information. It's really nonpartisan so that folks can really get informed and make an informed decision. It's very important that we are informed voters in this election.
And the one other thing I will mention in that voter's guide, it also tells all the places where you can go to do early voting and where you can go to a vote center on election day. There's a lot of information just about the election process in those voters guides, as well as what's on your ballot.
Right. And so we also hope that you also share this video with others to get the word out, to educate everyone. We did want to thank Nancy Soring from the League of Women Voters in Maryland for presenting this informative session as part of National Voter Education Week series. So thank you all for coming and participating in today's presentation. Thanks again, Nancy.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Appreciate it. Have a nice rest of your evening.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you a lot. That was great information.